Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Youth Powering Community session on Inner Work for Outer Work. Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à la séance aujourd'hui. I'm really excited to be joined today by my co-hosts and as I mentioned earlier, some great shift disturbers who are going to help us navigate this really interesting conversation around inner work for outer work. My name's Lee Rose. I'm going to be your host for today. And I'm coming to you today from my backyard, working from home. My kids are in the house, so this is my office as I try to co-manage working the kids and doing everything and the dog. So a lovely place to be stuck. I feel really privileged and really fortunate to be able to have some space to be able to work that, and balancing, as everyone has, I think, multiple priorities during this pandemic. One of that is juggling kids who are in and out of school, and a pet, and all the other things that go around. So I apologize in advance if there are any intrusions or things like that, but we'll model that and offer the same thing for anyone else who has sort of interruptions or things happening with them today. I live in Gatineau, Quebec, at the confluences of the Ottawa, Gatineau, and Rideau rivers, which is on the traditional territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, which has been a traditional gathering place for many generations. And it seems appropriate as we gather here virtually today to take a moment to ground ourselves in the places where we each find ourselves. So take a moment to reflect on that, where you are today, the ground you're standing on or the place you're sitting, and be connected to that place, because I think it's really important to think about those and the history of the places that we're on right now, and we will continue to be. Feel free to use the chat feature to introduce yourselves to other participants. Maybe you can share your name, your pronouns, and where you're joining us from today. We're going to be sharing in a fluidly bilingual way today. So on va changer entre le français et l'anglais occasionnellement au cours de la séance aujourd'hui. Please feel free to engage in whatever language is more comfortable for you. Happy to provide some translation or interpretation for folks, but feel free to share questions, interact in the group conversations in either French or English. I think we have a predominantly Anglophone audience today, but I'm not going to assume everything there, but we will do some things there. But in the small group discussions, if you would prefer to speak in French or in a bilingual setting, please indicate that by adding your a B or an F to the end of your name as it shows up on the display, so that we can make sure that you're in a group that you're more comfortable speaking with it when we go into breakouts. Okay, so allons-y. My colleague Yasmine is on the line. So bonjour Yasmine, bienvenue. Wanted me to give a wave. She'll be co-hosting the session with me. So maybe Yas, you can give a quick shout out and a little introduction of yourself as we get started.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Lee. Yeah, hi everyone and welcome. I'm really excited to be joining you today. This is my second week with CKX, so in my first time with you all. So really excited and looking forward to this session. I'm also outside, so you might hear some cars driving by if my mic is on, so I apologize for that. And I'm coming from Toronto, or I'm in Toronto right now, and I'm an uninvited guest here. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate everyone's time. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Yas. Also grateful to have a pair of awesome guests with us today to help spark our thinking around today's topic of inner work for outer work. That's Hailey McCullough. So maybe Hailey, you can give us a wave. From Head of Adult Services at the Grand Prairie Public Library and the Youth Project Lead on Project Full Stop, Ending Period Poverty, which was an RBC Future Launch Community Challenge project. So looking forward to chatting with Hailey about the project and some of the reflections on inner and outer work with her. And also Ashleigh Weeden, a rural futurist, community builder, and sessional lecturer, research, and PhD candidate in the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development at the University of Guelph. So hi, Ashleigh. So lovely to have you here with us today. The focus for the Youth Powering Communities is inclusive of communities across Canada, but does have a particular focus on rural, remote, non-large urban centers. So some of the examples in the context and the projects we're sharing do have a bit more of a focus on those contexts and those realities. Though we do welcome the richness of experience even from urban settings. So we're not gonna say no if you're coming from Toronto, if you're south of Bloor, if you're on the TTC, you can still participate fully in today's session. But some of the content is specifically as part of the project from Youth Powering Communities, focusing on youth and youth-led organizations and movements in smaller centers and communities across the country. Before we dive into today's topic, let's take a few minutes to review our shared community agreements. And I will actually, Yas, I will copy a link into the chat for the people to view those. And did you want to go ahead and share the agreements in English?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So yeah, as Lee does that, I'll start reading them, but feel free to join me on that page to read along. So yeah, just to set kind of our community agreements and ground us together and make sure the space is as like safe as we can make it, we're just going to, yeah, try and follow these. So our community agreements represent a consensus on what everyone in our group needs from each other and commits to each other in order to feel safe, supported, open, productive, trusting. And as we enter into dialogue and relationship with each other through YPC, we propose the following guiding principles for our time together to review to be reviewed and amended as we need at the start of each session. So first one is we are accountable to working in the spirit of reconciliation and decolonization, and to exploring what it means for each of us. Wow, can I read right now? No. Second is we use people's pronouns. So invite you all to put your pronouns on your name tags if you would like. The third is all of our experiences, ideas, and intelligences are valuable and welcome. The fourth is we remember our lived experiences are different and acknowledge that we have different experiences from each other. We speak from the I and clarify the we. The fifth is we honor stories. So when we hear a story, we are being trusted to hold it, not to share it unless explicit permission is given. The sixth is we do not demand knowledge from others or answers to our questions, but enter into a relationship and confirm that someone is the person to ask and is comfortable answering. We respect their no. And the seventh is oops and ouch. So we acknowledge our mistakes and take steps to make it right. We make room for each other's make room for each other to acknowledge if they've been hurt or affected by our actions or words. So yeah, thank you. That's the English version.
Thanks, Yas. I'm going to just share those again in French. And while I'm doing that, just if there are any additional things you want to add to that, we can note that in the chat. Or any other flags that people want to raise to add to our agreements for our time together today. And also to share that these are open, and we encourage folks to start and to share and adapt these types of agreements with groups that they're working with. So please feel free to use them as a baseline. But these have been developed in consensus with some of our project partners already, but a good starting point for other types of engagement as well. Alors, c'est notre responsabilité de travailler dans un esprit de réconciliation et décolonialisation, that's a tough word in French, and decolonization, d'explorer que cela signifie pour chaque personne du groupe. Nous utilisons les pronoms correspondant aux personnes. Si vous désirez qu'on vous désigne par un pronom neutre de point de vue de sexe, s'il vous plaît, le mentionner ou l'indiquer avec votre nom sur le profil. Toutes nos expériences, idées et informations sont précieuses et bienvenues. Nous n'oublions pas que chaque personne du groupe a un vécu qui est différent de celui des autres. En disant « je », nous parlons en notre propre nom et nous expliquons ce que nous voulons dire lorsque nous utilisons le pronom « nous ». Nous honorons les histoires. Lorsque nous entendons une histoire, on nous fait confiance et que nous la garderons pour nous sans la partager, à moins d'avoir reçu l'autorisation explicite de le faire. Nous ne nous exigeons pas que les autres partagent leurs connaissances ou répondent à nos questions, mais nous entrons en contact et veillons à confirmer que la personne à qui nous adressons est bien celle à qui la question doit être posée. Et que cette personne est à l'aise de répondre. Nous respectons son refus. Et le dernier, c'est le oups et le oui. Nous reconnaissons nos erreurs et nous nous efforçons de les réparer. Nous permettrons aux autres de s'exprimer si nous les avons blessés ou affectés par nos actions ou nos paroles. Thank you very much, everyone. So the community agreements are really important to make sure that we have a safer space for everyone to participate today. If at all there's a moment in time where you're feeling unsafe or uncomfortable about something that's happening either in the plenary group or the small chat, you can send a direct message to myself or Yasmine, and we'll be happy to engage and help support you with that over the course of our time together today. Okay, so maybe as the group comes together and we start thinking about where we're going to spending our time today on inner work for outer work, I'd like to share a reflective practice that a number of them we're going to share today in terms of modeling. So one of these is a one-word check-in. And I'd like you to think of, if you could share in one word, what kind of energy you're bringing today. into this conversation. And I want you to be really honest with yourself. So this isn't performative. It isn't about like being the best at something or being on, because I think we're going to unpack some of that stuff over the course of the conversation today. So a real authentic check-in using one word. How are you doing right now? What's your energy level? What's your energy like? And you can share that in the chat. Alors, je vous demande si on peut partager un check-in ou un process d'auto-réflexion, de partager un mot qui signifie comment on se sent en ce moment ici, en groupe, puis d'être vraiment honnête avec nous-mêmes pour être certain que c'est pas une performance ou on n'essaie pas d'être pas la place où on est actuellement. So a real honest check-in, how people are doing, and you could throw that in the chat and let us know. Excellent. So we have someone who's curious, someone who's nervous. Hailey, that might be because you're speaking, right? And you've got some stuff to. Thanks for that honesty today. Refreshed, optimistic, inspired. We'll keep reading those through as we keep going along. Calm as I'm listening to the rain outside. Isn't there something soothing about the rain? I love that. That's just sort of really great. Okay. So in change work, our focus is often on the world around us. But there's a growing recognition that inner work, so the personal, reflective work around our perceptions, the narratives, the biases, the emotions, is really critical to being able to step fully into social change spaces in a way that is energizing and supportive for ourselves and others. And now, especially in this time of COVID and this pandemic and this time of social or physical distancing, it's tough, and we're holding on to a lot of stuff, and we're doing really important work in communities. But this notion of self-care and how do we show up in our work is so much more important and even more critical in this time. So in this time, how do we hold space for inner work in a way that is grounding and generative, supporting us as we navigate what some call uncharted waters? I'm getting a little tired of the unprecedented times and the uncertainty and the hope everyone is safe, and all of this sort of thing. That it feels really bad to start, you can't start an email without having to preface stay safe or like do everything. It's very exhausting, I think, to do that, but it's sort of a collective experience that we're all feeling at this moment. And I'd like to welcome Ashleigh Weeden to come help us get started with this. And Ashleigh, I want you maybe, if you could share a little bit more about you, and could you maybe take a moment to explain to me and to all of us, what is exactly a rural futurist?
Yeah, hi everybody, and thanks for, I agree with Lee, the best way I've heard this part is, like the great entroublement as a catch-all for whatever this mess is. So we have to try to find, I was using TCT as an acronym for these challenging times in some emails to try and move on with it, because it does feel disingenuous to say otherwise. But anyway, all of that said, I'm Ashleigh Weeden. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph, but I wear a number of different hats. I'm involved with a few local and national organizations, all concerned primarily with rural development. So I'm currently leading a couple projects for the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation on rapid research responses to specifically rural issues. And as you might hear, I live rurally as well, so you'll hear some equipment and stuff going in the background. And what is it? Well, Rural Futurist started as a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek clapback at some urbanists that kept calling themselves futurists and were claiming the only space that could be the only people talking about the future of community and what was going on. And most of them seemed to make up whatever a futurist meant to them or what an urbanist meant to them. And so I figured if they could do it, why couldn't I? And the funny part about that, and I think maybe being careful of the things we speak into existence sometimes, is that that's actually a really great catch-all for the kind of work that I do. When you get to a point when you're a little bit further into your career, I'm kind of into that third chapter being done now in my mid-30s. When you're looking backwards at some of the early dots that are connecting, all of my work looks at the future. So most of the projects that I'm involved in, whether it's on individual leadership support for young people, or whether it's on community supports for thinking about what the future of rural communities is going to look like, whether that's investment in broadband infrastructure or on soft infrastructure, such as the skill building that we're trying to do today, all of that's oriented towards looking at the future and grounded in rural communities. So sort of by speaking it into existence, it became a thing. Which is sometimes the way that it goes. And so that's a little bit about how my career has gone for the last 10 years, has about looking at whatever the next most interesting thing is, and then trying to figure out a way to do that. And quite often that's meant creating roles for myself that weren't there to begin with. So I think that that's been a big part of my journey, is learning how to step into things that weren't even there before, and hoping that the parachute arrives as you step off the edge of the deck, as it were.
That's real. I love the frame. I know that's on your Twitter handle, the rural futurist, and I love the sort of tongue in cheek and sort of the poke and jab at sort of some of the establishment stuff. And I think that there's something about that where you're bringing part of you into that narrative, right? In terms of so it's like leaning into, and we'll get into the authentic self a little bit later in the conversation today. But I wonder if you can share, what does it mean for you to bring your, that inner work to your space, and how do you do that sort of as a practitioner and someone working in this space?
So my journey with a lot of this wrestling with what it means to kind of authentically show up in my work starts from my early career designs of wanting to work in the public service. So I am recently back into research in my PhD from about a decade working in local government and different orders of government, so primarily on the civil service side. And I think, we all have these stereotypes of what a government employee looks like, acts like, all these kinds of things. There's a reason why the word bureaucrat gets thrown around with varying degrees of disrespect. It tends to be used as a little bit of a put down on folks that work for the public service. And I started my career and often got hired into positions because I was young and fresh and different and creative, and would bring new approaches to things. And then I would be in a role for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and it would become, okay, well, be young, fresh, creative, and different, but just not like that. And I think that that's a thing that a lot of people that position themselves or try to want to act in terms of making change find themselves in, particularly in your early days in your career, because we do tend to kind of take a view of, well, just give it a couple years and you won't be so full of this spirit to change everything, and then you'll know what the reality of it is. And the other thing is I tend to show up a little bit differently as well. This is COVID time, so my hair is varying degrees of grayish at the moment, but it's usually some variety of a rainbow color. I dress in very bright colors. It's always been a big part of my own personal expression in the world, which has also usually clashed in government offices. It was a very, all things considered, a very safe way of showing up differently in the workplace. And I was really frustrated about how all of these things seem to conspire to make my contributions less impactful, or to keep me off of decision-making tables that I really needed to be part of. And so I started playing with a lot of this work through some coaching. I was very fortunate to have access to a career coach and to some people that I trusted, and started writing around these ideas of what it would mean for the public service if we were able to, or willing to, show a bit more vulnerability and show up as we are. Because you can't kind of take off your core personality or your core subjectivity the second you walk in the office at 8:29 and then put it back on at 4:31 when you walk out the door. Who you are is who you are, and that shapes how you contribute to somewhere. And that's actually a real strength. The things that made me difficult for traditional bureaucracy to handle were also things that made me really good at my job, in terms of asking different questions, or coming to the table and saying, well, why are we doing it that way? And maybe there's a different way we could be doing it. And we can take the work seriously without taking ourselves seriously. So nothing says this has to be awful and boring and dreadful. We can bake fun into a lot of the things that we do. So all of that started to percolate maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I wrote some pieces for Municipal World, which is a major trade publication for across North America, around this idea, and it started to pick up steam. So in part of these conversations, someone offered me this opportunity to talk about what's in your cup And I thought this was such a great way of framing the discussion around how do we make sure what spills out of us is we're aware of it. So your authenticity, if someone bumps into you, the analogy being you're walking around, you're carrying a cup and someone bumps into you. What spills out of that cup is what's in the cup. It doesn't just miraculously become something else because it's now outside of the cup. So if you're walking around with a lot of resentment or a lot of like that chip on your shoulder kind of thing, or something a little bit acidic, the thing that comes out is likely to burn other people. If you're walking around feeling more grounded, or you have a story that you're carrying that lets you use whatever your experiences are, good or bad, in ways that are self-aware and of value to you in terms of charting your journey forward, then what comes out of that cup is a little less wounding for other people. It also lets us kind of be aware of it's not good or bad. What's in the cup is what's in the cup at any given day. And sometimes the cup is empty. Like, you know what I mean? Like right now, I don't know, over the last few weeks, my cup has been empty of a few things. But in general, that self-awareness tool becomes, how do I sit with myself and understand my own experiences, good, bad, and ugly, and how they shape the things that are likely to come out of me when I'm faced with some sort of shock. And arguably right now, both individually and in a wider variety of ways in society, we've been hit, our cups have been hit in a major way, right? It's the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of exposed a lot of what's already existing in our systems that are, good in terms of mutual aid, and bad in terms of the way some aspects of our economy functions. And so part of being reflective around what's in your cup is understanding how you respond to major shocks, and the ways that you can use those tools to understand what you might do after somebody bumps into you as well.
Oh, it's an interesting point, and I know that Yas, I wonder if you can share the link to the reflection tool in the chat. So I loved when we chatted earlier about the session, like this metaphor of the cup, and I realized like I've got a glass of water and it's like a third full now. So chances of spilling are a little lower now than they were earlier. But in the chat, we've thrown together a Google Doc or a Google slide, and we're going to move into a little bit of individual reflection for a little bit. So we're going to spend a bit of time here. And Yas, I don't know if you wanted to introduce us a little bit in terms of what we're sort of asking people to do for the next 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Ashley, for sharing that, and Lee for setting this up. Yeah, so we wanted to, building off of what Ashley just shared, do an activity together. So hopefully you can access this slide page, and we'll invite you to make a copy of this. If you have like a Google account, you should be able to make your own copy and fill out what's in your cup. So you should see like some coffee cups with insert text there. And then if you would rather do this pen and paper or like drawing style, we invite you to do that as well. And just take the next couple of minutes to think about what's in your cup right now, and yeah, and reflect on that. So yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to message me or Lee or Ashley, and we'll be happy to answer. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Excellent. So yeah, we'll take a few minutes. On va prendre quelques minutes pour partager nos réflexions individuelles. Comme qu'on a dit en anglais, que contient ta tasse? Alors, quand on se promène, si on pense à se promener avec un verre ou une tasse, puis si on se bouscule avec quelqu'un d'autre, il y a des choses qui vont se renverser de la tasse. Ça se fait des émotions, des perceptions, autre chose. Fait qu'on vous demande de prendre quelques minutes pour une réflexion individuelle afin d'identifier qu'est-ce que vous portez dans votre tasse ou qu'est-ce qui contient votre tasse présentement. Après ça, on va se trouver en petit groupe de discussion pour quelques minutes pour partager en petit groupe. Alors, on vous laisse ça. Je me mets à muet et on vous revient dans quelques minutes. So I'm going to mute, turn off the screen, and we'll be back. Feel free to turn off your screens if you feel as well. We'll take about 5 minutes for this individual reflection, and then we'll come back and do a small group conversation. Sorry, if you're looking to edit, you have to make a copy of the document first so people can individually. So if you go to File, you can make a copy from the dropdown if you're using a Google account. Hopefully that answers your question. Awesome. Yeah, we didn't want to reveal everyone with the contents of everyone's cup on one doc until we got to the small group discussion. So this was our, Yas did a great job of putting together this reflective tool for us to use today. Okay, so we take a couple more seconds to pull together some thoughts. And now through the wizardry of Zoom, we've created some breakout groups for conversations with between 3 or 4 other folks. And we're going to take about 10 to 12 minutes or so to share. And this will be self-directed, so there won't be a host with you in the room to encourage you to sort of self-organize and share to whatever level you're comfortable with around some of the things that you're holding in your cup. And then we'll come back to the group to share some reflections. And Yasmine, I think the system's going to automatically send you to a group, but you're happy to come back to the main room so that we can have you in case we need to jump in. If you need anything while you're in the breakouts, we're not going to pop in unless we're invited. So please feel free to let us know if you need anything. Otherwise, we'll see you back here in about 10 to 12 minutes. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. And Yas, remind me at the end before we come back to unpause it so we get it.
For sure.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. I think we've got most people back. We'll see. It's the participant. Okay. I hope the conversations went well. We didn't get any requests for pop-in, so I feel that's a good sign. I'm always curious as a host in these, when we facilitate in person, it's always great because you can sort of like go around and check out sort of the vibe from each of the breakouts, but it's difficult to do that in Zoom. So I'm trusting that things went well and that everyone had good conversations. I wonder if a few folks, maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3, might share some of the reflections from either the exercise or some of the things that would surprise them in terms of the conversation. And maybe to help facilitate this, if we could use the reaction button on the bottom of the screen to have a thumbs up. And if you want to share something, would invite you to give us a thumbs up, and then we can call on you to share with the group. I wonder maybe if I can call on Ashleigh to maybe model your exercise, and then we'll see if anyone else wants to share after that.
We're always happy to go first. So we had a lovely chat sort of about maybe more around the usefulness of the cup analogy, and got to chat with Rachel and Naroja about their experiences in terms of thinking about reflecting on those tools and how you ask better questions yourself. So we maybe spent a little bit more time thinking about how we use these kinds of questions to guide our reactions to things. So getting really curious about the way we react to stuff. And the various different strategies around, which I think we're going to talk about later, Lee, around when you are a leader and you do see yourself as being someone that wants to make positive change, sort of maybe sometimes you have to pay extra special attention to those questions so that you're not putting your own self into a position of empty cups. And then how do you refill that if you figure out that maybe the things that are in your cup or your strategies that you have been using are proved to be no longer effective, or are starting to deplete you in particular ways. How do you build different ones? And then particularly in a time, of isolation and remoteness, I love Naroja being up in the north and talking a bit about, how do you, when you're thinking about that, not just individually, but community-wise, in terms of what you have access to and how you reach out for those things to sort of replenish your resources. It was really lovely conversation, and thanks to both Rachel and Naroja for a great chat. It was really nice.
Awesome, thanks, Ashleigh. Wonder if anyone else wanted to share anything from their small group conversations or reflection, or like maybe an aha moment that you might have had in terms of some of the things that you you noticed. I think one of the things for me sometimes is like, what's in the very bottom of your cup? Like the swill at the bottom of a coffee cup, the grounds and the things that are sort of the last thing to come up. And sometimes those are the things that you probably don't want to spill out and were the last to spill out. But something that my therapist has told me is follow your discomfort, or that thing that leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. Like that's where the good stuff is, like those crunchy bits. And to not sort of shy away from those, but tend to be at the bottom of the cup so they spill out last. It might be interesting to sort of think about, as we think about that reflective exercise, the layers of things that are in your cup in terms of where are they? Are they the first to spill out? And what typically happens in terms of the way that you show up and the way that you deal with things? And what are the things that you kind of like really hold towards the bottom? So that might be a further reflection for when you take that exercise and share it with other colleagues or with yourself, to think about, okay, what is the sequencing of the things that we have here? Suellen, I wonder if you wanted to share a few things from your conversation.
A couple things that we talked about was the uncertainty of the future. Not knowing where we're going, not knowing how long this is going to last, not knowing how we put together, a life ahead of us, and just being okay with ourselves and how much time we have to be alone and really reflect on ourselves from a busy life that we've kind of been talking about colonizing and colonization. Well, that busy life profile really kind of is part of that we've been trained doing things a certain way and keeping busy and getting our check marks off of what we're supposed to do to excel. And all of a sudden that's all stopped and we're kind of stuck in our tracks. And what do we do from here? So then you're left looking at your cup and what do I have in here and what's going to help me with this? And a lot of those things for myself, I think, were social things, and it's hard to use them up when you're not with other people. So there's just a lot of reflection on where do we go from here, and what is it going to look like, and can we be okay with that, and how do we make something better than what we had before? A lot like the creative aspect that Ashleigh talked about earlier. That how do we bring that? Let's make something better, and how do we do that? Not that we got any solutions, but we had a lot of good questions.
Yeah, I think you raise an excellent point, Suellen, about what's in the cup and like how is that different based on what context you're in and who you're with and how that shows up. And I'm going to really milk this metaphor for a little bit more about the cup, but there's not a chance to replenish it with anything else right now. Like we're drinking the same thing all the time. Like there's not a chance to switch it. Like we're kind of in a routine and we're And there's something about acknowledging that and kind of knowing that. What I love most about these reflective exercises, sorry, that's my neighbor's dog, Freddie, who's very curious about everything. Awareness about what's in other people's cups too. Like when you think about these things, it's like, oh, you know, other people are carrying things as well, especially in these cases. Like the notion of being more empathetic, or more aware of what other people are carrying is something that I find really helpful when I sort of undertake these practices. So they tell me a lot about me and my own practice, but I'm like, oh, everyone else is carrying stuff too. And that's it's a beautiful reminder to think that we're all holding things, and we're holding things, and things are affecting us in different ways. And I think it's an interesting reflection, especially because we're stuck, or perceived to be stuck sometimes in isolation or in different places. So thanks for those reflections.
Thank you.
I wonder if anyone else had a thing to share before we come back. I'm going to see if there's any more thumbs up. I love this new functionality on the Zoom. So Inda, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Awesome. Over to you.
So I joined in late, so sorry about that, but I'm glad I can catch parts of the discussion. I want to ask a question. For me, one of the things to, when we're talking about, full cups and how to pour out of it, one of the things that kind of overwhelms me right now is that as a journalist and also a community worker, everyone is overworked. And every time you have to take a break, and we all do, you feel guilty for leaving your team, or and that like your boss is also having like overwork, and now you have to step up and kind of fill those gaps where you're needed, but you're also overwhelmed. So what do you do in those situations? How do you ask for something that you need without adding more work or more burden to your coworkers, I guess?
That's a great question, and it's a beautiful segue to a conversation we're gonna have a little bit later about the performative self, like the performative best of like having to be on all the time, and how do we actually do that. So we are going to get to that. So if we do, but I do want to say, like, the first thing you've done is you just mentioned it now. You just asked the question, like you've brought it forward in a way, and sometimes modeling that vulnerability or modeling that, hey, I'm doing that. I find it's really important if you're in leadership, or if you're in a spot where people look up to you as a mentor or as something, a leader, or whether you're running a program, an executive director or a youth leader. Sometimes you modeling that vulnerability will give a permission space for others to also display that level of what they're feeling as well. So I've learned that, in terms of my work, like when I check in with my team, I'm honest about what's going on, so that they, I've created a space where if I'm also holding stuff, it's okay for others to feel that. So if you're in a position where people are looking up to you, or you're in a position of authority or leadership and those kinds of things, you and your own modeling that vulnerability is such a critical tool. And you'll notice it if you show it in a team meeting where there's a lot of tension. If you're like holding that space and you just sort of like, oh man, I'm really not doing this well, or I'm shaking things off, you can literally see the energy shift in a room, and as everyone kind of relaxes, like, oh, okay, I got this. We're all feeling something, and then there's an honesty in that conversation that shows up in that way. So that partially answers your question, but we're going to get into the showing up and the authentic self in a little bit, and maybe this is a good time to bring in Hailey and your work. And so thinking about your own work. So Hailey from the Grand Prairie Public Library is the youth lead on one of the projects that was funded through the RBC Future Launch Community Challenge. And I wonder, Hailey, if you want to talk a little bit about the project, and then we talked earlier about your personal connections to this work and your own inner work in that space. So over to you to tell us a little bit more about Project Full Stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lee. So I'll just start by saying I'm a librarian, and when we heard about the RBC Future Launch Community Challenge, we decided to submit an application for a project that would provide free pads and tampons in all of the library's washrooms. We called it Project Full Stop, kind of a cute name. I like cute names, sue me. And the goal of it is to help fight period poverty. Right now with the pandemic, we've been working with local nonprofits in town, like homeless shelters, youth shelters, different groups like that, to donate sealed boxes of products so that the people who need the period products are still getting them, even though the library and all of our washrooms are closed to the public right now. So just kind of an interesting fact, for you guys. Periods and menstruation are still kind of considered a taboo subject, right? So I thought it was kind of interesting to learn that the word taboo actually comes from the Polynesian word tapua, which means menstruation. So the idea of periods being a taboo subject has been entrenched even in language for a really long time. And I just kind of wanted to bring that up as kind of food for thoughts, and also because one of the goals of the project I really wanted to pursue was to help end that cycle of shame and embarrassment that are so often associated with periods, and to do my part to try to get them away from that taboo association. I'm 29, but I can remember being a teenager and feeling like my period was something dirty that I had to hide, or I couldn't talk about it. And even in my 20s, I remember going to the washroom and hiding my pads or tampons in a pocket or up my sleeve, because there's still that shameful feeling tied to periods, and like there's something we need to be discreet about. Even in commercials up until recently, you know, they have the little blue liquid on the underwear or the pad, and because God forbid it was blood. And you know, always keeping it discreet and things like that. So I really want to try and challenge that in my work with this project. And one thing I kind of like to touch on is the fact that I'm really fortunate in that I've had to deal with very little stigma in my life. I'm white, I'm middle class. I'm not part of the LGBTQ community, although I do consider myself a really strong ally. And this sort of came up in our preparation for this discussion. I just wanted to recognize that some people have additional stigmas outside of periods that lead to very different experiences than what I've encountered. And I think it's important to understand that not everyone has to share their stigma or their story. That's their choice. But I'm happy to share mine. And so I've had to work on myself a lot to overcome my feelings of shame and embarrassment associated with periods. And it's still a work in progress, but the RBC Future Launch Challenge has helped a lot with it. The more research I did about periods, the angrier I kind of got, and started wondering why I was embarrassed to be carrying around a tampon, considering so many of us bleed or know someone who bleeds. And then I just kind of became convinced it was important for me to try to become an advocate for fighting period stigma. And I think that one of the goals of this learning series and these discussions is all about learning how we can show up and have an honest conversation with ourselves and each other about what we hold sacred, whatever that might be. And that's kind of something that's not going to happen in an afternoon, and that's okay. I think it can be really exhausting, kind of continually striving for the best, and that we should be focusing on striving for better. And I think Ashleigh is going to talk with that in a little bit. But I know that Lee has a story he would like to share, so I'm just going to kind of pass it back over to him and thank him for entrusting us with his story.
Thanks, Hailey. Yeah, this is it's interesting thinking about like this inner work, and we have this particular context right now with this this example that we're showing with Project Full Stop in the period stigmas, and I'll share a story that was quite embarrassing for me as a person who doesn't experience a period, and this is a question about like inner work for people as well when something happens outside of your context or something you're familiar with. So I used to manage a call center or a team in a call center. I was a young manager. I was like 25. Like I was way too young to be managing a team at a call center, but I was a warm body at the right time, and there I was. A young woman on my team got up and she took her purse and got up, and I thought she was leaving for the day, and before the end of her shift. And I totally embarrassed her in front of the whole call center team by basically calling her like, where are you going? You think you're done for the day? And it was just, I didn't realize that in that moment. I thought it was just completely, I didn't even think of it for a second. And then a female manager colleague pulled me aside and said, hey, like what you did there, just so you know, like she probably was just going to the washroom. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about it. And I was so embarrassed after for what I had done, and sort of the unintended sort of like shame and embarrassment that I put on someone else because I hadn't done sort of the thinking around that, or my own awareness around that. Yeah, maybe she is just going to the washroom. But I had made an assumption that she just decided she was done for the day. So that kind of reflection and that kind of learning for me as a manager was like, whoa, what kind of thing am I putting out there? And how am I showing up in that space? And had a really productive conversation with her after, but I still remember that moment in terms of the assumptions that I have of someone else's experience or what they're doing or what they're presenting and how they're showing up in the space. And I still feel terrible about what happened. But I've learned a lot from that particular experience about how important it is for me to think about other people's experiences as well and to show up in that kind of a way. Yeah, totally ridiculous. And, you know, if I could do it all over again, I would think about it much differently. But just one example of this type of thing in this particular story that in this context that Hailey is sharing, that I was like, oh man, I've lived that from the other side. And I've also experienced kind of embarrassment about going to buy pads or tampons for people in my life who do experience their periods, and I've gotten over that in this kind. But I just wonder about the socialized, you know, stigma that's sort of that society puts on, and sort of the patriarchy and all those things. That it's not, you know, it's not macho or masculine to go out and actually purchase these things. So lots of inner work thinking about how we show up in those things we do as allies and as partners and people as well. So thanks for the opportunity to share that, Hailey, and wondered if you had anything else to share in terms of your own personal journey as we go in your connection to the project.
Yeah, so I guess one of the ways I've been trying to work on myself and kind of help get over those negative feelings I was having and associating with periods before I took on the project is, you know, having honest conversations with my coworkers. So like if they say, oh, you know, hey, how you're doing? Like now I can say, oh, you know, I'm not feeling that great today. I'm on my period. And I'm just trying to like kind of coach myself to make that a normal part of my vocabulary and normal part of my conversations. And I think that if we strive to do that, it'll normalize it for others as well. And then eventually we can start trying to fight the stigma, fight the taboo, like that sort of thing.
I'm going to ask Ashleigh and Yaz to come back into the conversation now, and to just pivot to the conversation that we mentioned or alluded to around the idea of this performative bestness we talked about in our prep call, and sort of the fact that we always have to be on and ready to go and at our best and all those things. And I guess maybe some initial reflections. Maybe we could start with Yaz on some thoughts on, you know, what does that look like, and how do you get over sort of that pressure to always be on?
Yeah, thank you, Lee, and thank you, Hailey, for both sharing your stories. I think that was really important reflections from both sides. And yeah, I think this is something I'm still working on, and I don't even know if I've fully achieved it. And but I think for me, also being young and in my early 20s, and like as a Black woman and queer, I recognize the ways in which I show up in spaces, and then also the way that I'm perceived in spaces. So for me, showing up as my authentic self has been a bit of a challenge, because I want to be authentic, and I think I try to be as authentic as possible, but there have been experiences in which I do that and then get shut down. So as I've gotten older, and I know I'm still younger, but as I've gotten older and more confident in myself and my beliefs, I've tried to like be more real. And as much as there have been times in which like yes, I may be shut down, or I might have experienced a response that I wasn't expecting, overall, every time I have shown up authentically has benefited me a tremendous amount. And I just think we all kind of hold different hats. At least I think I do, and I'm sure everyone here does as well. And I know there are spaces where I hold more of an activist hat or more of like an education hat, because I'm doing my master's right now. And so I'm trying to think about ways that those all intersect, and making sure that those intersections show up in everything I do. Because I think there are so many people, like just like Lee mentioned earlier, when you're true to how you're feeling in that moment, there's going to be someone else who's like, okay, I feel that. Okay, cool. I can take a breath. And I find, especially because of my identity, it's really important, not just for like me to be authentic for myself, but also for the other folks in the space who may be marginalized and don't feel empowered enough to talk about how they're feeling and what they believe in. And yeah, I just think it's really important as we kind of progress up this like leadership or professional in these spaces, that you kind of show up authentically, not only for yourself, but other people, and hold everyone along that journey with you. So yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and I definitely think it's a learning journey, and I'm really lucky to have people that I can look to kind of walk through that with me. So I definitely rely on community for that as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, yes. Yeah, it's interesting to bring in, like we talk about something like bringing your whole self or your authentic self to work. And I think the idea of I like bringing an authentic self rather than a whole self to a space, because sometimes it's not safe to bring your whole self into work or a different context based on what's happening and what identities. And I totally recognize, the privilege as a cisgendered white guy. I come into a space and like, you don't realize sometimes, oh, like there's already power shows up in a different way, or people's assumptions and things show up in a different way. So there's a self-awareness sometimes of how we come into spaces. And I wonder, Ashleigh, if there's any conversation specifically around like in a smaller town where everyone knows you, right? Where there's, you can't get away from it. And, I think of like the gossip rag or the Facebook community groups or the things like that. Like, how does that show up in a way where like, how do you show up in a small town where, where everyone knows your name or everyone knows your business? And I wonder if you wanted to share some reflections on that.
Yeah, it's like the community version of Cheers, right? But the thing, I just want to go back as well, because this plays into it, and your comment, Inda, around expressing needs and knowing that we're all kind of tapped right now, right? So I think there's a real valuable moment in pausing to reflect that none of us are getting what we need right now. And so, truly, if we were getting what we needed, then it wouldn't be a crisis. So, there's a real value in saying we can't actually meet each other's needs at this current time. You think about the very basic human needs. Babies will die if they're not touched, even if they have all of their other biological needs met. And so we're in a situation right now where a very basic human need for human interaction and touch and closeness is not being fed or met right now. And so there's power in saying, how is that manifesting elsewhere? So that is coming in, for me personally, taking on more work than I should, or overextending myself. And that comes out into directly what Yasmine was talking about, what we've been talking with around a bit of a performativeness around it of, I can't actually do anything about not being able to meet people I love, meet their needs, and even my own needs. And that's incredibly frustrating and draining and exhausting in and of itself. And sitting in that space is painful. And the way that I've imperfectly and perhaps to my own detriment at times tried to overcome that feeling of helplessness, rather than sit and confront it, has been to say, but I can do this, and I can do this, and I can take on this extra project, and I can take on this, and see, look how valuable and amazing I am, and you can't get rid of me because I meet all of your other needs, so ignore these other ones that we're all kind of dealing with at the current time. And I think that that's particularly for those of us that aspire to, or who are in positions where we are in roles of leadership, no matter where you are in an organization or community, that tends to be the way we cope with this, right? Is let me be of value, let me be of service, when maybe the more valuable thing is to say, look, all of this is terrible, and how do we make it slightly less terrible? And that means acknowledging that I have to say no sometimes in order to be able to say yes to serving a greater need or a greater thing. When it comes to small towns, I think this doubles, right? So I was staring in our pre-call for this, I shared a story about and there's the Rachel's on the phone. I know Rachel from my previous life and working in this community, but I was working in Owen Sound, working for the county, and I had just started, and they had launched a new brand, and everybody hated it, and I was cornered at a party, sort of a Saturday night, 3:00 in the morning, by someone who has since become a very good friend, but who was just kind of going up one side and down the other me about a thing that I had nothing to do with, but I was tasked with fixing. And it was 3 a.m. We both had far too much to drink. And I said, I had to find a moment in myself to say, how do I not make this worse while also finding a way to handle this professionally? And so I think there's a really powerful realization in that how do you manage this kind of performative onness when, if you are a public servant in particular, or in a community leadership role, you are essentially never off the clock, right? This recognition that the way that you're showing up in your community, you are modeling that behavior, whether you're being paid to do so, or you're in your official capacity of your organization, or whether you're just would like to be left alone and live your life. That doesn't happen, and I think that happens in all spaces, urban or rural, but I think it's magnified in smaller towns because people see you more. They see you at the grocery store. I know you talked about your partner being a teacher, and the horror, the amazement of people saying, well, she was in her pajamas at the grocery store, something's wrong, and well, sometimes you just gotta go get some milk in your PJs, leave me alone. So I think that part of this managing a performative bestness is sort of how I awkwardly phrased it, is a tendency in social change circles in particular to say if it's not perfect, then it's not good at all. And so if a person is not perfect in all of the ways we want them to be perfect, then they're not contributing anything, or we sort of do this policing thing of each other that is not helpful in the way that I love that oops and ouch framing is, you know, holding people accountable versus expecting them to be the best ever are different standards. And then we internalize that, at least I do. And we talked about this in our breakout group, that what's in my cup often comes out as a little bit of a chip on my shoulder around, well, I want that gold star that person over there got. Like, I'm pretty great. How come I don't have that? Give me that, you know, that kind of thing. Which is just, you know, me struggling with my own inability to see my value as I am and the things that I do contribute. And so if we're going to be able to navigate all of this awfulness, as I mentioned earlier, recognizing the places where we are imperfect is really important, and recognizing that that's what makes us human is important. And Brené Brown offers this idea that around vulnerability being our pointy bits, right? And that's how we latch onto each other. You can't connect with someone who's perfectly smooth. There's nothing to hold on to. You just slide right off. But if someone has got some little edgier bits and they come out, you kind of tend to say, oh, well, I recognize some of that. Like, I know that pain, or I know that weird reaction, or that verbal tick. Mine is, you know, I giggle sometimes after provocative things because I'm just like, see, it's fine, guys, you know. And so recognizing that in other people and saying, I see that, I recognize that, I feel that, and that's okay. Even when it's things that we wish weren't there, I think are really important lessons for ourselves and each other. So rather than trying to perform as if we can act like nothing is happening different now, and, you know, the great entroublement is not greatly entroubling, it's important that we recognize this is going to show up in a lot of messy, weird human ways in ourselves and others. And then how do we let ourselves be okay with that while moving forward, while saying, okay, that's a place, like you said before, that's the dregs at the bottom of the cup that I can move forward into, and kind of learn to deal with the bitterness there, maybe add a bit of milk, I don't know. We're going to push this analogy forever.
So good. In the chat, I shared earlier a link to a Google Doc where we have some shared resources that we have compiled. And so we've contributed to those already, and invite others to share other resources or tools or practices. That document is open and live, so even after the session will still be available for that. And I wanted to open it up. We're a smaller group now than, which I think provides a certain level of like intimacy for a space. So I wanted to open it up for a bit of more of a conversation with everyone. And I know, Inda, we'll come back to you in terms of like that question that you asked. I wonder if there are others who have other questions or reflections that they'd like to share with the group in terms of some of the things that are resonating, or, you know, a particular challenge you might be dealing with that you might want to sort of offer to the group for reflection and review. So if you want to chime in, give us a thumbs up, and we'll give you the virtual floor. I do, while we're waiting, that story of the mother of my children. Yeah, a teacher in a small town. Like, Madame Karine cannot go out without everyone knowing where she's been, and it's, you know, it's very challenging sometimes. Because I just wanted to go and get this, or sit on the patio and not run into a student. You know, so it's very challenging.
Yeah, goodness forbid there be wine bottles in the recycling container at the end of the driveway. And how many?
yeah, heaven forbid. Exactly. Hailey, was there anything coming from you specifically, like from your perspective with either the public library or your own personal experience about how this is showing up?
Yep, libraries are notorious for trying to one-up each other all the time in terms of programming, services, collections. Like, we're super like helpful with each other. Like, oh yeah, let me send you my notes, but also I want that gold star, it's mine. Like Ashleigh was saying, like, we're notorious for that, and also just being like super, I don't know what it is about librarians being overachievers, but it's just like bred into us. I honestly, like, it's just part of our DNA, I think. And so I see that a lot in different groups and things like that, where we're just like super helpful, but also like, I'm going to do better than you.
Yeah, there's something about that. Like, and when the competition kind of comes off a little bit, or you're just like, okay, wait, we don't always have to be on together, right? Like, you can sort of like collaborate authentically rather than trying to like be best and outperforming.
Yeah, like I've come to that conclusion myself, where I'm just like, okay, like, it's exhausting having like trying to be the best all the time, and you just get further, I think, if you're more collaborative and you kind of turn that button off and then just sort of work together and have a more, I think, genuine goal. Like I don't know. I find I do better with that button switched off.
Absolutely. Yeah, once you realize sort of the greater good and we all get there, is it's much better than sort of being always running for first place when you're okay, I'm happy to be second. It's totally fine. We don't have to be first in those spaces. I wanted, maybe while we're waiting, if anyone else, feel free to chime in. I can share a couple of the tools that we shared in there and that I find really useful. Especially if you're working with teams, and sometimes the inner work sometimes thinks like it's one person and we have to do this by ourselves. But there's a couple of the tools that are really interesting to use in teams, or whether that's work teams or project teams, or even like with groups of sometimes I nerd out and my kids tell me, Dad, stop facilitating us. We don't need to be facilitated right now. So I'm trying to run through practices, but so maybe not with your family, but I'll just share a couple of insights on two of the tools specifically. And just, again, the idea here is with a lot of this inner work for outer work is to reframe our thinking around something and to come at something from a different perspective. And so one I'll share is the River of Life, which is a graphic-based tool. So we use the What's in Your Cup as more drawing, but the River of Life reflection tool, I really like it because you have to complete it without using any words. So it forces your brain to think about something differently. And basically what you do is you actually draw out the river of your life in terms of like, what are the eddies and where are the flows? What happened? Was there a waterfall, or was there lots of rapids and those things? And you really just journal it out and draw it out on a sheet of paper. And it's a way for you to get thinking about what are the moments in your life and how does that show up? And then it's really awesome to share it with other folks. So take some time. Everyone draws the river of their life with the things using no words, which is really difficult for some folks who tend to process, using written form or orally. But a quiet, reflective exercise where giving someone some crayons and permission to draw or to create something is a really powerful sort of unlocking of a different side of your brain. So that's one that we use all the time in our hosting and facilitation practices. And the other one that I'll share is one that is 10-year-old you. So this is a process and a practice that I've adapted from a couple of things where, again, thinking about things from a different perspective. If you're coming at a problem or a challenge and you're always looking at it from the same perspective. This one, trying to explain to my children the nature of my work. Working for complex social change and doing all these things. And I was like, what's the easiest way that I can articulate the nature of my work to my 10-year-old? And I was like, Daddy helps other people make the world a better place. Like that was the clearest articulation of my work in a way that could be really understood. And that I was like, oh, I need to say that more often, even to adults, in terms of like, that's the nature of this work. And then a couple hours later, he's like, oh yeah, Dad, what's your job again? Are you a superhero? Is that what that was? And I was like, that's really cute. And I really appreciated that. But this exercise of like 10-year-old you, so imagine yourself, again, this is one of those things that you come back to the inner work is, either if you have a child or if you want to go back to yourself as a 10-year-old, that sense of wonder and enthusiasm and excitement for what you had for the future. And to think about how you might describe your work and the thing you're working at to your 10-year-old self. And, are you where you wanted to be? I think everyone wanted to be a marine biologist at some point. I think that was something that was very obvious for most people to be like, I'm going to be a marine biologist, or I'm going to be a pediatrician, or all these things. And no, I'm not going to be the managing director of a social change agency. What is that? But just reflecting on your experience as and how would you describe your work to your 10-year-old self? And what's the journey you've taken? And the idea of using different words or different language to describe what you're doing, because we tend to default to the jargon of our industry or our community or sort of the things that we work at. So how do we reframe and code switch that? If you speak more than one language, this is another thing I use sometimes, is switching between English and French in terms of, I'm going to intentionally think about this in the other language, because that's running through a thought process in a different language or in a different context helps for you to think about, there's another word for that, or a different frame around those kinds of things. So those are a couple of the practices, and there's links to the documents. And if you're going to facilitate them with groups, feel free to share those practices with them. We've also cited, or we've adapted and evolved from other folks as well. But those are open documents, and would encourage you to use them and adapt them for use in your own for your own reflection and work, and also in the groups that you're working with. I wonder if anyone. I'm just going to check for hands up. Don't have any hands up. Yes, Matthew Doyle, you've got a hand up.
Hi. this is actually an interesting point about the language thing, is that in a conversation I had with a First Nations man who we were organizing some kind of a basketball event, and he said that in their language, the way they use like the way their language, so in I'll give you an example because I don't fully understand it. I don't actually speak the language, but let's say I have like a bottle of ketchup, and I would refer to it as my ketchup bottle. Their like kind of prefix for that would be like our ketchup bottle or the ketchup bottle. And I think that a lot of languages approach, in the way they're like structured, approach things very differently because of like cultural differences. And so I think that like you can, if you kind of look for it, even just in French and English, you can see those differences as well.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful reflection in terms of like the importance of language, or the cultural context there, like that collective versus the individual in those spaces. And that's an interesting thing to think about, like that it's already, there's a default that it's communal versus a default that it's like individually owned. So thank you so much for sharing that reflection, Matthew. All right, anybody else have any thoughts, reflections, or questions they might have in terms of like, this is a crunchy thing you're dealing with. We've got some folks who've got some lived experience who are thinking about things really thoughtfully. So if anyone has any questions or things that you might want to explore in our last few moments. Inda, back to you.
I wonder if this has been talked about before I got in, but I think the immigrant experience also adds to that layer of wanting to perform more, because you're kind of like trying to prove that you're someone who's worth staying here in Canada, like worth keeping and worth the citizenship or the permanent residency and worth the job and all of that. So I think for me, I'm not first generation, I'm the first immigrant in my family. So that adds an extra layer. Like I always want to prove myself to my employers and my community that I'm like, I bring value to this community.
Yeah, I think it's an important reflection of distinction. I think it speaks to a lot about privilege, and I think the complexity of Canada, I think in this particular context, when we talk about colonization and our relationship with Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, what in Quebec we call pure laine or old stock, who I'm like, I'm the French are colonizers and have been colonized, so there's all this complexity in terms of all those identities. And I wonder if anyone else who has a similar lived experience, because I don't have that lived experience as a what people call a new Canadian or an immigrant, but I wonder if anyone who has a similar lived experience might want to share or respond to that question.
While we're waiting for folks to speak up, I think the outsider experience is always interesting, right? And I think that we're all outsiders to something, and recognizing the degree to which we might feel like how do we become an insider is always an interesting conversation, and certainly as someone that doesn't have that lived experience either, but I can, sitting here thinking of how powerful that is as a reflection, and how valuable that is to offer as an insight for folks to think about the ways in which the pressures to perform, right? To perform that kind of I'm worthy. The hustle for your worthiness, I think, is Brown's phrase for it, which is just it's a dehumanizing. It's a dehumanizing experience. And so I think that, one, thank you for offering that, and then two, that becomes a really powerful tool also then in not putting pressure on yourself to have to, hearing from friends around having to be the singular voice to speak on behalf of as well, right? Like, okay, well then if I'm representative of all of this, then that way it's impossible. So I can't imagine working and existing under that pressure. And so, like that's a really important thing to remind everybody about.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ashleigh. Yas, did you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I'm first generation, or like maybe 1.5. My mom was born in Canada, but my dad immigrated here. And so although I don't have that exact lived experience, I can see it through like the way in which he like moves through the world. And thank you for bringing this up and having the vulnerability to share that with everyone here. And yeah, I think it's really important too. And what you're talking about is making sure that we like find our community again, and that doesn't necessarily mean people like from our own like backgrounds or home places, but just finding people that you can kind of have these kind of conversations with. I've found that has helped my dad a lot, and even me. And then thinking about like in regards to like colonialism and trying to work against that. Something I think another pressure to add to that is like feeling like you have to be the best and the only kind of in regards to your culture or like being an immigrant person or being racialized is like I'm the only one, and then you get kind of like gatekeepy once you're in that space, and thinking about how again like we can hopefully try and bring people along that ride. And that wasn't really insight of to like offer anything, but it's just another thing I've found that has happened with my dad and myself. It's just when you have been given the opportunity to do something, sometimes you get really scared and want to hold on to it and then kind of ice out everyone else who's looking for that same opportunity. And something a friend has been reflecting on is like starting to make our own spaces and kind of stop trying to look for a ticket in to a space that may never welcome, and start making like spaces in which like we are centered and like, or your own experience is centered, has been something that I found really helpful. And yeah. So yeah, but thank you again for sharing that.
Thanks, Yas. So we're near the top of the clock, and I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and share it in the chat the link to upcoming sessions. So we, as this is a series of sessions going through to October, our next 2 sessions are the urgency of anti-oppression work, which we're hosting on Thursday, June 18th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and then sharing your story, so the importance of storytelling in social change work, happening on July 23rd at 2:30 Eastern time as well. So the links to register are available there in the chat. And Yas, I wonder, we've got a couple, I'm really grateful for the richness of these conversations, and I wondered if you wanted to share like a closing sort of reflection or collective experience for us as we intentionally close our time together. And before that, I'll just say heaps of gratitude to Ashleigh and Hailey for sharing today with us. Links to the resources and a recording will be made available as well. So if you weren't able to stay for the whole thing, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, you can definitely do that. But I'll turn it over to Yas to close us out with a closing reflection or practice.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. And again, echoing that gratitude for Ashleigh and Hailey and everyone in the space for just showing up. So in my opinion, you felt very authentic. So thank you for showing up that way. And yeah, I was thinking about doing a grounding exercise just as a way to kind of like regain our footing, because I know these conversations can be tough. And so just kind of resettle into ourselves. So if you would like to join, please do so. It shouldn't be more than like a couple of minutes, but you're also welcome to leave, of course. But yeah, so I welcome you to place your body in any way that is comfortable. You can be sitting or standing in the same spot for a while. So just kind of find a place of comfort. And as you do that, begin to become aware of how your body feels and adjust and release any tension. And if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes or look down, or try to clear your mind by fixating your gaze on one place, or even turning off your camera. So let's begin with the breath. I invite you to place one hand on your chest and one over your stomach. Relax your stomach and let your breath drop down into your belly, into your toes as your belly expands. If your hand is on your belly, breathe so that your belly pushes your hand out. Imagine that breath pushing down through your feet, through the base of your spine, as if you were a tree pushing down roots. Let those roots go down through the floor, through the soil below us. Imagine they can feel something of quality of that earth, what it likes to grow, how healthy it is. Push down through the waters under the earth, down through the bedrock, down into the fire below us. If there's still any tension or fear, let that go into the fire and burn away into pure energy. Now imagine you can draw some of that fire up. Feel it as the earth is living, creative energy, and bring it up through the rock and the water and the soil. Bring it up into your legs and feet at the base of your spine. Bring it up your spine and let your spine grow like a flexible tree trunk, reaching up to the sky. Bring some fire into your heart, into any place inside you that needs healing or extra energy. Bring that energy through your arms and out your hands, and through your neck and throat, and at the top of your head like branches, and reach up to the sky. And then spread around you and reach back down to touch the earth. They create a protective filter around you. Take a moment. Look at the energy web. Notice if there are any places that need to be repaired or strengthened. And notice how the energy feels when we all do this together. Now feel the energy of the sun shining down on your leaves and branches. Breathe deep. Draw that energy in. Breathe it down, your energy and your branches, down through your heart and your belly and your hands. Take it in. Feed on it like a tree feeds on sunlight. And now come back to stillness. As you breathe, feel where it is in your body, where this grounded place seems to live. Touch that place. Can you find an image for this grounded state? A word or a phrase? Can you say? When you use these three together, touch, image, and phrase, you create an anchor to help you ground quickly in any situation. So I invite you to try it and use it moving forward. Lastly, notice your breath again. Take a deep breath in and hold, and take a deep breath out. And when you're comfortable, you can start to open your eyes again and regain your awareness of your surroundings. And I hope you noticed the change. But yeah, thank you for joining in this grounding exercise with me. Thank you, everyone.
What a wonderful way to spend some time together. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you again online soon. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.